Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, we're at that time in the offseason where you're kind of digging into some of the top teams in college football, getting ready to kind of make your predictions on who's going to win a national championship. And just like I was 12 months ago, I find myself looking at this Georgia Bulldogs team and saying, they're my pick to win the national championship. But what I think makes this Georgia team more special than it was in 2023 is this is one of the first times that a lot of the returning production from a team that, as a Michigan fan, was probably the team I didn't want to play in the college football playoffs the most, arguably the best team in the country on any given Saturday. I think they get better heading into 2024. And then you start looking across the college football landscape and say, Michigan losing half their roster to the NFL draft, Alabama, a team that has to replace Nick Saban and plenty of players to the NFL draft. Washington obviously expected to take a massive slide and say, out of the top teams that we saw in college football, this Georgia team was certainly one of them in 2023, and it seems like they're just going to get better heading into 2024. I want to dive into this roster, talk about kind of where Georgia gets better, why we expect them to win a national championship in 2024. Fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Georgia Bulldog fans. It's been a blast talking this program, going back to 2023, covering this team on the recruiting trail. The amount of support, the amount of go dogs you guys drop in the comments section, that stuff, it means the world to the boys. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And you got to start with Carson Beck at quarterback. And I think when's the last time we're talking about a Kirby Smart team, a Georgia Bulldog team over the last couple of years where they've been historically dominant, and saying they probably have the quarterback that if you asked me to start a program and pick a quarterback heading into 2024 that's going to win me the most amount of games, I look across the country and say I'm going with Carson Beck on top.
You're being almost like too conservative. I don't even think it's really that close. I'm looking like you look at what's coming back in the quarterback room. Like there are some good guys coming back. Shedeur Sanders, obviously Dillon Gabriel, Quinn Ewers. There's some good players, but I'm frankly looking. I don't think anyone was playing nearly as good as Carson Beck was last year. So you look, I think he's almost the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman. I think he's certainly the odds-on favorite to be the first quarterback selected in the draft next year. I'm looking. You're right. You never say that about Georgia. They've had solid quarterback play with some of their past guys, but you've never had that guy who you look at. That's a surefire top 5 pick.
And we all kind of labeled him when he got the job in fall camp last year and said, all right, Kirby Smart picked him because he's going to be a game manager.
That's just what people think about Georgia quarterback. It's just like so unfair, but this is what we all think.
You go to Carson Beck's film in 2023, this is a guy that is making NFL caliber throws. Quite frankly, very well could have gone to the NFL draft. And I think going into year 2 as a starter, it's not unreasonable to say he takes a step in the right direction in 2024. You're looking at bona fide one of, if not the best quarterback in the country. You look at the rest of the talent around him at running back, I think it's a pretty clear upgrade with Trevor Etienne, a guy that was so good after contact for Florida behind an offensive line that was so brutal in 2023. What does he look like behind an offensive line that's one of the better units in the country? Then I look at this Georgia offensive line and say, yes, you lose guys like Van Pran, one of my all-time favorite college football players. You lose Amarius Mims. I look at this Georgia offensive line and say it's one of the better units in the country again.
You know what's unique about this Georgia offensive line? You look, redshirt senior, redshirt junior, redshirt junior, redshirt sophomore, all 3-year guys, 4-year guys, 5-year guys. And that's a very dangerous mix when you talk about what Georgia's been able to do in terms of developing those guys through their program. Nobody's really been doing it like Georgia. And when you have guys like Ratledge and Truss coming back, Fairchild, obviously really good. Micah Morris might not even play this year. You're looking at a guy who's one of the top guards in the country. Yeah. It's a fascinating unit. It's just really experienced. It's deep. It's veteran. They're going to be as good as we've seen, I think, Georgia offensive lines.
And they're deep. And we talk about why does Georgia have so much success late in college football seasons? It's because they're deep along the line of scrimmage. And you said it, Micah Morris, I think he's a top 10 guard in the country, and he's not even starting for the Georgia Bulldogs. I'm going to give the Georgia fans a hot take, and I would love to hear what they have to say in the comment section. I look at this pass catching room and I say, all right, you lose Brock Bowers, the best tight end we've seen in our lifetime. You lose a guy like Lad McConkey, who was certainly completely underrated during his time at Georgia, and the NFL kind of showed you how they view him, like top 50 pick in the NFL draft. Is it crazy to say that this pass catcher room at the very least holds serve and potentially can get better heading into 2024? I'd love to hear from the Georgia fans in the comment section. Dill, I'll give you kind of a crack at that comment there.
So my thing, and it's really hard to say it gets more talented, if you will, just because, again, you're losing a historic player in Brock Bowers. There's no other way to say it. And you're right. I mean, you have three guys now with Benjamin Urasek, who I think is wildly underrated in the sense. It's like when you're playing at Stanford for a really weak team out there, you just kind of fly under the radar. But like we're watching him in the middle of the night on the East Coast. It's like, well, who's this guy, Benjamin Urasek? He should be going pro. He obviously
swatting away at Stanford, being one of the best tight ends in the country.
But to me, the big thing about what Georgia can do to, again, add a new dynamic to what they had in the offensive pass catching unit last year is just being able to be a little more explosive, because you saw how good Carson Beck was working the middle of the field, getting the ball into that 15 to 30-yard range. I mean, I don't think anyone was doing it at the clip they were doing it, and that's very obvious. You can do that when you have really good route runners like Ladd McConkey and a really good tight end like what you had with, obviously, Brock Bowers. But I just don't think you had the dynamic weapons possibly that you have this year. You look at the two transfers, London Humphreys and Colby Young, really elite guys getting down the field. And to me, the one guy I'm looking for is Anthony Evans. On a team with Arian Smith, I don't think it's totally unfair to think Anthony Evans might be the most explosive player on the field.
You look at Georgia in that pass catcher room, it was very clear that Kirby Smart agrees with you. Like, they'll look at the two names that they brought in. Colby Young, a big body wide receiver that can go up and make plays when that football's in the air. And then London Humphreys. This was a kid that went to Vanderbilt as a true freshman, averaged over 20 yards per catch, ran a 10.7 coming out of high school. Like, big frame, big-time vertical speed. Kirby Smart went to the transfer portal with, I think, what exactly you just said in mind, and saying we got to get a little bit more explosive, attack that deeper third a little bit better. Now, you start talking about some of the wide receivers that come back, Dill. I'm going to kind of another hot take, I guess, if you will. Dominic Lovett is going to be top 10 in the country in receiving yards. I think Dominic Lovett is going to emerge as that true wide receiver one, quite frankly, kind of just overshadowed last year because I think Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey kind of ate up some of the targets that really Dominic Lovett kind of thrives with. I think he's going to get a massive target share. He's a guy that can create separation with ease, operate after the catch. Dylan Bell, I always say, I don't know how he's so good, but he's just so good at football. A guy that is just gets it done. Ra Thomas, a ton of competition. They go three deep in the pass catcher room. They go three deep at the tight end position. You got to be fired up about this Georgia offense. Now, Dill, here is where I think, and Georgia fans, we've had this conversation in the past. What held Georgia back in 2023 in the big moments? I think it was the front seven, specifically the defensive line, and maybe just not having the difference makers that they had during those national championship teams. Those guys like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Nolan Smith. In 2024, if this Georgia program wins a national championship, you got to have some of these guys really step up and dominate along the line of scrimmage, right? Whether it's Mikael Williams, whether it's a true sophomore like Damon Wilson Jr., who has a ton of juice coming off the edge, whether it's a third-year guy in Jalen Walker, who I think is purely the best pass rusher on the team, whether it's guys like Jamal Jarrett, Jordan Hall. I think a lot of Georgia fans feel this sentiment. They need to get those difference makers back on the defensive line.
And you like the guys like Stackhouse and Brinson. Those are really good players, and they start everywhere in the country, obviously. But they're not those number one overall, like those first-round picks. I don't think that, again, you look at what Jordan Hall did last year. You saw those flashes of, well, this looks like a Georgia defensive lineman when Georgia's defensive line was that unit that you just, like, no one could do anything against. Kristen Miller's had those moments too. And then I think I'm kind of with you. You need Mikael Williams to get it rolling again. I thought he looked awesome in the spring, so that you love seeing that again. I thought that was a really disappointing sophomore year for him in a sense. And obviously you're grading him on the curve of the end of his freshman year, you were like, man, this guy's going to be a first-round pick. He needs to have a first-round pick season, and I'm with you. Jalen Walker, they just need to sit him on the edge and let him go to work on people, because you're right. He does have that pass rushing knack that I think you kind of were missing for at times last year.
Yeah, you kind of missed that guy that when you started forcing those third and longs in 2021 and 2022 is a death sentence for teams. Like, they just couldn't block up those Georgia defensive linemen in that pass rush. Last year, they kind of could, right? And I think you go into 2024, and I think what's exciting for Georgia fans is we just listed probably 6 or 7 guys that were really young in 2023 that could probably make that step in 2024. Now the question is, all right, which one of those guys is going to take that step? You look at the linebacker room, there's not a more talented linebacker room in the country. I don't know, Dill, if we fast forward 10 years from now, I think we're looking at multiple All-Pros in this Georgia linebacker room. Like whether they're freshmen, whether they're second-year guys, you take a look at C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson. You talk about some of the true freshmen that are coming in, multiple All-Pro kind of guys in the NFL that are on this Georgia team. They made an All-SEC guy in Dumas Johnson transfer out. That's just how good Georgia was at that linebacker spot. Then you look at the secondary, you lose a guy in Kamari Lassiter, who I think was so good for Georgia. But, I mean, you return Malachi Starks, the best safety in the country. You return guys like Julian Humphrey and Dalen Everett. Joe Nelaguero, I think, was just born made to play that star position. And then you sprinkle in potentially Ellis Robinson, who, if you're asking me, true freshman across the country that can make a massive impact in 2024, Ellis Robinson's probably on the top of the list. I look at the secondary and say I couldn't name you 5 secondaries that are better than Georgia Bulldogs heading into the 2024 year.
No, and you're right. You lose guys. Obviously, you're always going to lose guys if you're Georgia, but you kind of still have the same recipe you've always wanted. You have big, physical, athletic cornerbacks on the edge with Julian Humphrey and Dalen Everett, guys who just can kind of impose their will on teams. And you're right. When you have Malachi Starks, who is probably the best secondary player, right up there with the guys like Will Johnson and Jabbar Muhammad, I mean, that's powerful. Like, he really can play. I think will mask up, and it'll be interesting to see who that other safety is running with him. But again, you got one horse, so he'll find someone. They're too talented.
Dan Jackson, I know he's not the flashiest name. Like, I know he's not the 5-star KJ Bolden that's coming in as a true freshman. Dan Jackson is a very solid football player, and Georgia has found those kind of guys that you just develop over time. He's going to, I believe, his 5th year within the program, has stayed the course. I mean, I know it's not the flashiest name in the secondary room. I wouldn't be surprised if he plays some damn good football for the Georgia Bulldogs. You get into the secondary, or I guess not the secondary, the schedule. Dill, it's you never get an easy schedule in the SEC. But when you're Georgia, I mean, I look at these games and say, I think I'd pick maybe one toss-up game for Georgia, right? You open up against Clemson. I believe that line's sitting at 12.5. It kind of tells you how Vegas kind of – I'm high on Clemson, and I think Georgia wins that game. And then you start looking and scrolling down the schedule. I mean, you get a bye week before you have to go on the road to Tuscaloosa. I think that is massive. You're getting Alabama with a new coach, kind of new system going in. I think that's a really good time to play them. And Dill, the one game that I'm kind of looking at and just kind of, I guess just 2 games outside of that Bama game, it's on the road at Texas, a team that we think gets a lot better heading into 2024. I think Georgia and Texas are 2 of the best teams in the country. And then on the road at Ole Miss. And you look at the rest of the schedule, and you're saying, I don't know how many games. I don't know if I'm picking Georgia to lose a single game on this schedule, but just kind of looking at some of the big games, you are on the road in probably your 3 biggest games, Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss. But Dill, I mean, even on the road, I'm having a hard time pressed to pick Georgia not to win those games.
No, and Georgia's going to be a favorite in every game they play. So, you looking at their schedule, it's always going to be about Georgia. It doesn't matter what the other teams do when Georgia plays their best game, I think, this year. Yep. Aside from Texas, I think they should win every game. And Texas will be an interesting one for sure. I think those, when I look at college football, I think there are 4 clear teams to me that have an edge over everyone. I think it's Texas. I think it's Georgia. I think it's Ohio State. And I think it's Oregon. So those 4 teams I look at, I think they're the teams I'm kind of picking. But again, even in that pack, I still think Georgia is, I think they'll always kind of be in control of what happens.
I was gonna ask you that question. Georgia, Texas, both play their A games. Like, who are you taking? Even if it's in Texas, I look at it and I have a ton of respect for Texas. It's hard to pick against Georgia if they play their best football game. And again, you saw them lose 1 game. They didn't play their best football game. It's rare that Kirby Smart team did not play their best football game in the big moments. That's what happened in 2023. I don't think you're going to see that happen much in 2024. And again, because of all that returning production, you kind of just have that confidence that Georgia's going to be able to get it done in those big moments. Fired up about this program. We'll cut it at that. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas again. Can't thank you guys enough for all the support. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all